Perfect. I see that our first panelist has joined. I think I see him in a small video, but I'm pretty sure it's him. So I'm just gonna give a brief introduction and then give way to his speech. So Carlo Ratti, is, if many of you don't know, he's an architect and engineer by training. He teaches at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, where he directs the Sensible City Lab. That is a research lab investigating the impact of digital technologies in our cities. And he's also the founding partner of International Design and Innovation Office, Carlo Ratti Associati. I just want to say two things that I think are a good introduction to Carlo. And it's one, that 3 of his projects, the Digital Water Pavilion, the Copenhagen Wheel, and Scribd, were hailed by Time magazine as the best inventions of the year, and that he's currently serving as the co-chair for the World Economic Forum Global Council on Future Cities and Urbanization. And with this, I would like to give way to Carlo if he would like to give us a little bit of a glimpse of what is going on in the world today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, JC. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yes.
Yeah. So thanks, JC. I'm having a small issue with my computer this morning. I don't know what is happening. So I basically lost my slides. But no worries. I wanted to do anyway this session in a very interactive way. I'll see if meanwhile we can fix it. We can recover them. If not, I would just talk for like 10 or 15 minutes, saying the same thing. I would show me slides, and then from there we can have a conversation and go back and forth. But the key thing I wanted to mention is that there's something very interesting in our cities, and that's that all of those technologies that change our lives over the past 10, 20, 30 years ago, the internet, sensors, actuators, and so on, you name it, well, all of them are entering physical space. They're entering the space of the city, and they create a new hybrid dimension. Some people call this the smart city space. We like to call it more like, sensible city. I like sensible because it has this double meaning, able to sense and sensible, and puts a bit more emphasis on the human side of things instead of technological side like smart city. But whatever you want to call it, the consequences of this are very interesting. They mean that basically we can use data to understand much better our cities. We can use artificial intelligence, different type of algorithms to process the data. Bear in mind, there's no AI unless you've got data. So the two things go hand in hand. And then we can turn this into various forms of transformation or, quotes, actuation, including transforming the city by design. That's a way to actuate the city. Or, real-time actuation where the city responds dynamically, as in many of the systems you're looking at based on climate change. Now, that is a general concept. That's what we are passionate about. We do this, as JC was mentioning, we're doing this from the research point of view at MIT, both in Boston and in Singapore, around 50 people at Sensible City Lab. We're doing this with our design office when this becomes like a building or a piece of a city. And we're doing this also with startups. We've got kind of 3 companies in the US, 3 in Europe. The first one that we did is actually now a unicorn. And they look at the same space. Again, how we can use this new hybrid dimension in order to improve our cities. Now, again, it looks really like, and I apologize about this, it's the first time it's happening to me, but because this computer issue, that I will not be able to share the slides with you, so I'll just go with words through a few things I wanted to share with you. Well, for instance, a project we've been doing, and you find some published papers about this. The first author was Daniele Santucci. Daniele was working at the time over the past few years with Thomas Auer. Some of you might know Thomas Auer from Transolar. He was doing his PhD in Munich with Thomas Auer, and he spent a bit of time at MIT where we work on the following that I'll tell you now. So we actually looked at a lot of huge amount of traces of big data about how people move in the city, and we correlated that with climate data. So for the first time, we can really look at how people decide to walk on one side of the sidewalk, on the other side of the sidewalk, and so on, based on very precise information about where they actually are and very precise information about climate. is a bit, if you want, a new level. Marilena, who was just speaking before, did some very seminal and important papers, I think dating back, Marilena, if I'm not wrong, to the end of your PhD, really looking at this. But at the time, you had to go and ask things to people. You need the questionnaires, you need to, shadow them and see where they would go, where they would sit, and so on. Now, today, for the first time, we can automate that and scale this up at the level of, millions of traces. And so in this paper with Daniele, we've been looking at that, over 100,000 people in Boston and in San Francisco, how they move, and try to correlate that with local microclimate information. So a simple example of how we can use new types of big data in order to discover new dimensions of the city, in particular related to how we respond to climate. I'll tell you another example that I had in the slides, maybe by the end of the before the end of our gathering. If you want, I'll share a PDF. Hopefully, I'll be able to recover them. Another thing is something that we've done over the past few years. We called it local warming. And in that case, again, in a similar way, thanks to AI, thanks to data, you can create responsive heating and cooling systems. So in the case of local warming, we started at MIT with a small installation. We've shown it at the Venice Biennale with Rem Koolhaas Biennale, dealing with the main systems in buildings, the fundamentals. And so we looked at heating there in dynamic way. And we also implemented in Turin with the design of the Agnelli Foundation a few years later. So that's something that started from research and then ended up into the real world, into real building, and we're now expanding that into other projects. And so again, the idea is that you got a lot of data about occupancy. The data about occupancy can be, all anonymized, but based on occupancy, you can have a building that responds dynamically. So a building that, will turn on and off a bit like your computer screen, will go on standby if nobody's there. It will also help to have, the conditions you like. In offices, we traditionally have these kind of thermostat wars, and where people cannot agree on the temperature or some environmental conditions locally. But now, if you create an intelligent system, you can get not only a building that responds to aggregate information about occupancy, but also people individually who can get their detail settings. Now, it looks like I might have fixed the problem. So let me try to connect from another link. If it works, I'll switch and I'll share some slides for the rest of the presentation. Again, it's going to be like another 10 minutes, and then we can talk and interact together. Let me see. It looks like it's working. So I will skip some of the things I already talked to you about. Going back to the initial thing, versions digital and physical, something like this. This is also what we use as our logo. And we are looking at different operations. I see a city like this, like a living organism. It's a visualization that was modern art in New York. Pedus was a researcher at our lab at MIT. And again, we can look at all this data to describe a city, again, like a natural organism, like a living organism. And then I'll skip to, for instance, I'll skip some of the things I already told you, but I'll skip to some of the other work we're doing. For instance, what you see here is something we started doing in Cambridge a few years ago, which is mount a bunch of sensors onto garbage trucks. And again, one key component, as I said before, is about data. We can collect data in an opportunistic way. What in research we say opportunistic, by, for instance, collecting data from cell phones. Opportunistic because the data is already collected by an app or by the cell phone network, the cell phone operator, and opportunistic anonymized in research, or we can also deploy some networks. And so what we started doing is we started putting garbage trucks with sensors and going across Cambridge. So you'll see here, oh, you were not seeing the screen, perhaps. Okay, here you see here in a second the video. And now we're doing this in why is this? We're doing this in collecting data, again, as I said, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but also we got, at the moment, the same sensors installed on fleets, both in New York, in Stockholm, and in other cities. And then again, you know, it becomes interesting because you get data about where people are, you get data about microclimate, and you can again start to better understand the relationship between the two. You can look at urban comforts in a very, very fine-grained way. And again, through that and through big data, then start to help better understand the city. Another thing we discovered when doing this, and what you see here is actually visualization of all the tracks moving through the street network. What we discovered is that, you know, we were very surprised at the beginning. If you just have 3 tracks, think about a city such as Cambridge, over 100,000 people, and with 3 tracks, we could cover every street segment at least once a week. So that also led us to do some additional mathematical analysis. It's a paper in PNAS that was published a couple of years ago, where we look at what we call the sensing power of vehicle fleets. And it turns out, when you look at this, when you look at this graph, so on the x-axis, you got the number of vehicles. On the y-axis, you got the percentage of segments, street segments that you're scanning. So 100%, it means you're scanning all of them, but 0.5, 50%, you know, 0.5, 50% of the street segments. Now, look in your city, you can get to scanning 50% of street segments, in this case, daily, with a very, very limited number, a few dozen of vehicles. So again, you know, we discovered this interesting regularity that opens the way for much more dynamic and mobile sensing in our cities. And then again, something else you might want to do is mix up these 2 types of data. I said before, opportunistic data you can collect from cell phone, from smartphone, but also data, things that you're measuring in the city. So I showed before, we are measuring fine-grained information about environmental information, pollution, you know, air quality in general, and so on. So what we did here is put together these 2 types of data sets. On the one hand, you got people and where people are, and you can get that from cell phone data. Cell phone data tells you population in a dynamic way as people are moving through the city. And then you got this kind of fine-grained information about their pollution and their quality in general. And by combining the 2, you can actually get interesting things. You know, think about you are a mayor and you want to improve air quality in your city. Well, you know, today what you will try to do is mostly try to, you know, improve the air quality situation across the whole city. But the reality is, if you want to maximize impact on people, and if your resources are limited, what you want to do is focus on exposure. So no need to, well, start from the places where you've got most people, because that's where air quality is going to have the biggest effect on the urban population. And so by combining the 2, we actually realize there's a big difference between one and the other. So if you optimize simply based on, you know, minimizing the average, or focusing on where most of the population is. So we call it exposure track. As you see, I'm putting the papers, by the way, all the papers you can download from our Sensible City Lab website. So they're all available online for you to have a look at. But basically, we call it exposure track. So the impact of mobile device-based mobility patterns, which we get from smartphone, as I said, on quantifying population exposure to air pollution, and again, providing a new metric for mayors in order to decide how to respond to air pollution. Now, again, you know, this was done half with slides, half without slides, but I got many other things I can show you, but I think it would be more interesting probably to have a conversation. So maybe let's open it up, and then if there's not many comments, I'll continue flooding you with slides. But I think, you know, it might be good to have a bit of interaction with all of you. If there's any questions, comments, you know, challenges, and so on. But the key point I've been trying to make is really there's a new kind of dimension that is opening up. Just 20 years ago, we had to collect data in a very painful way, questionnaires, and, you know, shadowing people and asking them stuff. And today we can rely on this new goldmine of big data. We need to pay attention because sometimes big data is biased. Sometimes, you know, the quality is not the same, but it opens up, you know, the possibility to learn about our cities at the scale.
And if you want, I didn't show them today, but we have two papers. A paper that came out in Nature a few weeks ago, where we can use big data from over 100 million people in mobility, and we discover a new law of mobility we call the vegetation law. Got another paper coming up in Nature, where again we use big data to understand how we move in the city. You know, the optimization strategy, computing strategy, our brain, which ends up being very close to that of animals. We're not following shortest path; we're following another path that we call the pointless path. But again, all these are examples of how big data can help us to understand and elucidate dimension of our cities that were not accessible in the past. And again, any questions or comments before I flood you with another 300 slides? It's in your interest to ideas that anybody would like to share.
I think it's too early, and we have a shy audience, Carlo.
I don't know if yeah, as you're moderating, if you see, I don't know if you see any hands. I don't see the hands actually for whatever reason. But you know, if you just unmute yourself or raise your hand, and then. But I think you see. By the way, I'm not sure how this is working, because half of the people, the attendees, maybe they need to raise their hands because they cannot unmute themselves, I believe.
Yeah, we're collecting all the Q&As, but I think at this time in the morning, the questions are not coming that fast to everyone. So I think a key thing that I would like to ask you, Carlo, and perhaps after that you can show us a couple more things, is how you can couple this mobility law with the terms of thermal comfort, because I know that some of the research analyzes what makes a place attractive, and I wanted to ask you how much of this can be related to how comfortable you're in a place related to climate. So this could be a question that is related to the discussions later on.
Yeah, so I'll by the way, I see some other hands now raised, so I'll two sides. As I was saying before, one key thing is that looking at how people feel something comfortable or not comfortable, and looking at how people decide to walk on one side of the street or the other side of the street, is very interesting. There's if they like to walk in the sunshine or not in the sunshine, and so on. So again, this type of information that just 20 years ago you had to collect with questionnaires and observations, now you can collect at scale. So in this case, looking at mobility and using mobility of, again, in this latest Nature paper, over 100 million people anonymized. And then you can look, in this paper, we looked at that from the mobility point of view, combine this with local environmental conditions, then you start to elucidate the relationship between the two. And so you can look at walking and condition with sun, radiation of temperature, so on. So that's one component that I was saying. Again, it's a new space of investigation that is being up. So we think it's quite because it helped us find out new dimensions of the city. I saw another hand a moment ago. Was it maybe Dan or?
No, I have a couple of questions here that people have been asking. So I will read them to you. So the first one, I think.
Are those in the one in chat?
Yeah, in Q&A there is I don't know if you can see them as well.
Spot on. Privacy is a key issue when we look at all of this, but the key issue, I would say, beyond what we can use for research, is what is collected in our pockets. Now, back in 2006, we did the first project ever where we took data from millions of people collected from smartphones and used them to understand urban dynamics. And we showed it at the time at the Venice Biennale. We had a pavilion at the Venice Biennale, curated that year by Ricky Burdett from the London School of Economics. And well, for us, that was a conversation, starting a conversation about the potential of this type of data, but also the risk of this type of data. And at the time, think about this, in 2006, every cell phone would provide more or less 5 or 10 localization information per person per day. Now, today, your cell phone is probably collecting 500 or even 5,000 data points every day. You know, the different apps can track you. You got GPS data, which is much more accurate. So in kind of 15 years, the smartphone is basically has turned into something that's recording every second of our lives. And I think that is an issue primarily because we know very little about the companies that get the data. You know, those are both the company providing your operating system, but also some of the companies developing the apps, the different apps. You know, when you have most apps, you know, you need to say, okay, if you want them to work, okay for them to track your location. And, and so in just, 15, 20 years, things have gone from 5 data points per day to 500 or 5,000, which is, so yes, privacy is a big issue because of that. Somehow the issue is not much into using some of this data in research, because when we do it, we always go through the IRB. We ask, the ethical review board at the university to approve it. We anonymize everything. But the problem is general. The problem is society, and we should all be very, attentive to it, because tomorrow's democracy will depend on decisions we make today about data. I see another question by Julia. Julia, did you implement any heat and air pollution mitigation strategy, monitor changes in exposure risk vulnerability before and after? We focus mostly in understanding the city, so mostly in seeing where people are, how people behave, what the environment, how we can get environmental data, fine-grained environmental data. So we didn't implement many mitigation strategies. The only one is what I was saying before, the project local warming, where we were actually able to create this kind of bubble of heat that would be localized on people. And in that you can call, this was about heating during the winter. You can do the same with cooling during the summer, basically creating a responsive system that will mitigate locally with a little bubble. I'm seeing also from Philip a question about how does the work you're doing translate into a financeable model for action? How do you attract investors to solutions to issues that you are identifying? It's a very good question. And I think here I would look at two types of financing. One is the financing for research. And financing for research, I need to say, today, there's a lot of interest in such topics. So, as you see, not only with, for instance, European projects, as many of us are involved with here on the call today, not only with European projects, but also with the private funding from industry. At the lab at MIT, we got over 50% of funding coming from companies who are interested in different topics, including something like these companies and cities who are interested in topics. So I think the funding for research is not an issue, but the funding I think you're referring to is how do we use funding, find funding to turn this into innovations that can be developed and deployed at scale in our cities. And there's not a single answer. I'll show you something like a couple of slides to show you the different mechanisms. So here, for instance, in the following slide, there is some work that we did. This is some work that we did a few years ago in New York, where we looked at the shareability of mobility in a city. And if people share mobility, you can make the mobility sustainable. That's a PNAS from 6 years ago now, where we looked at that. And well, actually, this project led to a collaboration with Uber. And when we started, Uber didn't have Uber Pool. And as you know, today, Uber Pool has turned into a big service for Uber. But also, if you think about the competitors like Didi, Lyft, and so on, it's probably like a 50 billion per year industry that is about sharing mobility in our cities. And all other things being equal, that means instead of having two cars going from A to B, you can combine two trips in the same car, so you remove one car from the road. So this is one example of how sometimes things developed in the lab can then be deployed at scale with a partnership with a company, such as in this case Uber. In other cases, and I'll show you here another quick example, you might want to consider doing a startup yourself. And for instance, this as a a couple of slides. This is a project we did in 2009 called the Copenhagen Wheel that led to a company initially manufacturing e-bikes, especially the Copenhagen Wheel, but then now one of there is in micro. This is the first startup we did, which now a unicorn and operates. I think this was recent $60 million round to expand globally. But and by the way, this is recently in some of the Italian cities where it expanded. In Europe, it operates everywhere from Malaga to Stockholm to Milan, to Turin to Rome and to many other cities. Again, using data and artificial intelligence to change unit economics. Most scooter operators are losing money, able to change the unit economics using data and AI. So again, I want to tell you this is two examples. And in some cases, like the case with Uber, you might want to take stuff that you develop with research, and that can be done deploy the scale in partnership with a big player, with a company. But in other cases, don't be shy if you got an idea that's developed, one of the papers that you're doing that you think has potential for having an impact in cities, in turning that into a startup and turning that into your own company. And so we've done this now a few times, and it is another way to take research and bring it to the real world. You see, could you hear fine so far? And I think we are starting to get to the end of this. If there's any other additional questions, again, I still have my 300 slides up my sleeves. So
no, don't worry, Carl. I think we could hear you fine. I think just 1, 2 glitches, but we heard you fine. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Maybe the last one there by Samuel. I don't know if you can see it, and I think with that we can let you go.
I don't see a question by Samuel. Where is it? Is it
in the same list? But I can read it to you. So it says beyond the physical.
I don't see it, strangely enough. So if you can read it better.
Yeah, I will read it now. So it says beyond the physical benefits of adaptive interventions on thermal comfort, etc. Do you think there is a psychological effect too? For example, if people see and understand the interventions, does that increase their tolerance? Like being able to open windows raises people thermal conform's threshold.
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, that's something that Nick Glenn and I work with Baker and Koen's team when we were at the University of Cambridge. And so Nick Baker is one of the person who studied a lot of this, how, the mere that, you can open a window makes you much more comfortable. While if you feel you're in a fish tank where you cannot open any window, you don't have any degree of control on the environment, then, you feel much more discomfort. And, that's very well established, there's a lot of papers on that. So there's nothing new about that. What is new is before we're saying how we can use data to have an environment that responds dynamically. Sometimes people say that architecture is like our third skin. We got our own skin, we got the skin of our clothes, and then we got the skin of buildings around ourselves. But when you think about it, if you look at architecture in the past, it has been a rather rigid skin. You could say almost like a corset, an uncompromising skin. Well, today, thanks to sensors and actuators, that skin can become dynamic. And so I think there's going to be 2 types of interactions. One is the building itself that can respond to you better and faster, in a more direct way. I mentioned before, by the way, the Agnelli Foundation. I'll share with you a couple of images in a moment. So on the one hand, you got the building that responds more dynamically. But on the other hand, you can have people, interacting with the envelope, which is what you're saying, and then feeling more comfortable because of that. So somehow is a combination of the two that creates this really almost like an interaction, like 2 living things. The buildings are becoming alive, things a different type of intelligence and responsiveness, and people interact with the buildings more and more like you would interact with some kind of living being. And I'll share with you just a few images of the Agnelli Foundation, just with the concept. I think I need to stop here, share the screen. And yeah, so so in this building, the idea is, which was then built, is that the building itself responds to occupancy, as I was saying before, but also allows everybody individually to define the parameters of their own thermal bubble. So heating, lighting, and cooling all respond dynamically to occupancy, but also very precise way. And so those elements there at the top, well, here were some of the initial renderings, but here you see some of the reviews with those elements at the top on people's side are these kind of intelligence panels that can respond. There's somebody, yeah, probably should mute, who can respond dynamically to preferences and presence, the combination of the two. So somehow going back to the question, yes, absolutely right, is about different type of interactivity, how we can interact with the envelope and how the envelope and the building in general can interact with ourselves. Well, so I hope again, sorry for the little glitches at the beginning, but sometimes it's even better because so we can spend more time, talking instead of just, flooding you with slides. And, I think, looking forward to continue the discussion over the next, whatever, 48 hours with all of you. And I think, based on the timeline, probably time to move to the next slot.
Perfect, Carlos. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. I think it's always very good to see what you have been up to at the MIT. I of course know what we have been up to at CRA, but it's always great to hear you. And I think we can leave you to the rest of the day, because I know that you have a busy agenda today. So just thank you very much for joining,
but
and for opening the discussion.
I'm planning to be significantly connected with all of you, and also flying back to Torino tomorrow so we can continue the conversation and the discussion. So thanks a lot, JC. I'll be here muted.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Carlo.